We are here to hear about whether or not we are ready, how to build business resilience for any crisis. And I'm really excited to be joined by Alicia Johnson. She's an emergency preparedness expert with 20 years of experience, from forest fires to chemical spills to active shooters and data breaches. She's seen everything. She's the founder of Two Lynchpin Road, which is a company that helps small business owners, especially women and BIPOC-owned businesses, to create an emergency plan that'll keep your doors open, keep you generating revenue, and turn a crisis into an opportunity. So welcome, Alicia.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Heather.
You bet. So let's start with, what is an emergency?
Yeah, I mean, an emergency is anything that causes your business to pause. I was going to say stall, but really pause. Could be, that average things you see are like hurricanes or wildfire, tornadoes, data breaches, as you mentioned, active shooters, but could even be something smaller like a power outage that causes your business to lose its traction in forward movement. And really what constitutes an emergency is your response to that, right? Do you know how you're going to respond if something small happens or if something large happens? And then how do you do that? How do you implement that plan? It runs the gamut, but it's really an opportunity to leverage the capacity we have as organizations and as businesses to continue to help our clients and our communities.
Nice. So a lot of folks, especially on our LinkedIn channels and some of our social media channels, they have online businesses. And you might think, I have an online business, doesn't include me, but are there emergencies that arise that are really can impact online businesses?
Yeah, I have an online business. I work in my home office. And, I'm definitely concerned about disasters that could happen where I live. I'm in Northern California. So wildfire season is upon us. And that's definitely a disaster that could impact my home and therefore impact my business. And I think the other thing that really concerns at-home businesses or virtual-based businesses is concern about cyber, whether that's some type of cyber attack on your banking infrastructure. Maybe it's something you don't even control, but it's an element that you need it to work in order for you to make money. And if that doesn't work, how do you work around it, right? What do you do next? And so just being able to kind of think about what might happen in the future and how to respond to that is a key component. Just because you don't have a brick and mortar business doesn't mean you don't need to be prepared.
Right. I thought a lot about internet outages, but I hadn't thought a lot about banking, or if suddenly that kind of shut down, or there was a break in service for the banking world. So one after another. So that's our kind of online business world. What about our brick and mortar, or some things that impact both?
Sorry, hold on just a second.
Oh, the joys of working from home.
So I'm sorry, Heather, could you repeat the question
Sure.
one more time just to make sure I get the right answer?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about emergencies that can arise really specific to online businesses, but beyond that, getting a little more general, what might impact a brick and mortar and or an online business?
Yeah, we're talking about places, and there's lots of things that could just happen, right? Things that are maybe causing delays in service, or perhaps there's something that's also affecting your supply chain. We're seeing that a lot. Like you walk into a restaurant and they have concerns about their supply chain or concerns about levels of service, and so they're letting people know ahead of time, hey, this is occurring. Those are all parts and pieces of response that maybe aren't seen as astronomical disasters or things that are just going to totally break you. Or that would cause you to relocate, but they are little glitches in your service capacity. And those glitches as a small business can have a huge impact. And so being able to be prepared to respond accordingly and what is this called? Like when you
got a little bit of a technical
when you move around and just sort of adjust to have the nimbleness to work with others. And perhaps you're not the one who's directly impacted, but your client is. So how do you help them do that capacity or create that capacity?
So when we talk about responses, when we talk about emergency response, can you put that in context? What does an emergency response look like? I know it'd be different for different types of emergencies and different types of circumstances, but what are some of the responses we're looking at as a business?
Yeah, well, let's talk about wildfire, right? That's an area that both you and I, Heather, would be impacted on, since we're in the West Coast and we're in sort of mountainous or forest type of regions. We live on the urban interface. You're looking at things like smoke, and maybe you have to relocate because of smoke, or maybe that smoke impacts your weather pattern, impacts your ability to have power, as we mentioned before. If you have a power outage and you can't use the internet, or you have to evacuate your home or your place of business, right? If you have a brick and mortar place of business, there's also a really strong chance that if you are in a wildfire area that's under active evacuation, if you rely on any level of tourists or people to come to your store and buy a product from you, that business has dried up, because not forever, but just, right, while the evacuation is in place. So what's your level of comfort and your capacity to pivot with that? Do you then take things online like we saw with COVID? Or do you have enough savings to where you can continue to pay your employees while you wait it out? Are you at a point where you have a hotspot or you have backup power in your home through a generator or battery wall, and you're able to respond quickly to whatever is happening and act as if it's not really occurring for you? For those of us who are parents, what does that look like for us when we are kind of move stuff around, and maybe we have childcare needs, or maybe we have capacities that we have to kind of pivot towards or against. And so response it's unique. But what's clear is that every business is impacted by that. And so the ability to know and to think ahead, have some foresight about how those impacts happen, is really the key component of disaster planning. No plan looks the same for every business, which is where somebody like I come in to sort of help you understand what it is that you have, where your risks lie, and then help you create some sort of plan that allows you to pivot quickly to continue to bring in revenue.
Right. I remember early on in COVID, we have a local restaurant. A lot of restaurants, of course, suffered during COVID. Many of them closed. We had a local restaurant that did delivery. It was a small part of their business. And when COVID closed, they already had the infrastructure in place. So I don't know that they were planning for, I don't know if that was their emergency preparedness or disaster preparedness or anything like that. But they were able to pivot strongly into delivery and take advantage of that, because they already had that set up. They already had the plan in place. They just needed to scale it up. And so they were able to save some of their employees' jobs because they ramped up the delivery process and all of that. So kind of having that pivot in mind, I think it saved this business in particular. And then they were first to market for delivery and had their own infrastructure instead of paying other services to support them. So it was like these layers of kind of, gosh, if they didn't plan ahead, and sure enough, a lot of the businesses did close, the restaurants in particular. So
yeah, we have a similar story here. There's an ice cream shop that's a local favorite. And, at the beginning of COVID, they had a very small shop, so they really couldn't have traffic coming in and out. And they had a truck, and so that they used for parties and things like that. So they basically set up an online store where you could order your pint, and they would come and deliver to you. And so they required a minimum order, and you would just, that's 2 pints of ice cream or something like that. And they would bring it to your door. And what was so interesting to me, again, that was possible because they thought ahead, because they had the capacity to really make those decisions and move that type of process forward. And that, for a lot of people, it's tough to think like that on your feet when every other part of your business and your life is being impacted. And so having that capacity to really sort of bring peace of mind to, okay, I know what I'm going to do, and or at least I have a set of options available to me,
Right.
and I'm going to choose the one that best fits the scenario at the time.
Right. Nice. So tell me why every business owner needs an emergency plan.
Ooh, this is a great question. And for me, the answer really comes down to, you don't know what's going to happen, but you do know something is going to happen. We can read the headlines every single day, multiple headlines a day about communities who are experiencing something. And as business owners, we're also a part of that community. So whether our business is directly impacted or the community that we love is impacted, we're going to be impacted by that disaster, either on a first degree or a second degree basis. And having the ability to create an opportunity to pivot and connect is huge. It propels good decision making moving forward. It also propels revenue, and it really provides capacity to helping us understand what's next, and what's after that, and what are the effects of those types of things. So, every business owner needs it because it's now become a necessity. It's like doing your taxes. You have to do this if you want to do business in the US and frankly worldwide. And that's what this is. It's now a necessity because of the world that we live in.
Right. So when you're looking at emergency plans, I know you do a lot of work with women-owned businesses and BIPOC-owned businesses. What's different about working with those businesses? What other considerations do you take into account when you're working specifically with a woman-owned business or a BIPOC-owned business?
That's a great question. Women and those who are historically marginalized in all areas of life, not just in business, and never more so than in a disaster. There are worldwide statistics and also statistics pulling from COVID that show that businesses, particularly those owned by women and BIPOC, are more likely to be more heavily impacted, have less resources, and have less opportunity to continue their business and their revenue stream. And so when I work with those types of organizations, we really take that into account. If you don't have the access that a cisgendered white male has access to, how do we pivot? Where does that fit? What are you comfortable with doing? What's your comfort with risk? What does that look like? And also, are there kind of those quote unquote old school ways that we can tap into, that maybe, another type of organization would not be using? How do we set you up so that you're first to market in that change? And also, how do we set you up so that you have access to additional funding when you need it, whether that comes from the federal government or from a bank or from some other source, right? So just being able to kind of understand that and know those statistics helps us work with organizations so that we're all ready to make those types of pivots.
I'm interested in, you talk about a risk assessment when you're working with businesses, and you've already helped me out on that one. Number one, by following you on LinkedIn, first of all, but also, really looking at an internet disruption. And just today you mentioned there's banking disruption, right? So what does that look like? So when you sit down with a business and you're working with them one-on-one, what does that risk assessment look like?
Yeah, the risk assessment is geographic based first. So we look at the natural hazards that occur where your business is based. If you are remote or you have people all across the US or in different parts of the United States, and that's part of that risk assessment. I said US, but it could be worldwide as well, right? So we're considering your whole team, including where your company headquarters is. So we look at geography. We also then look at some of those other things, like, are you a virtual based business? If so, you're more likely going to be impacted by cyber. But even if you're brick and mortar, you're going to be impacted by cyber. And so what does that look like? Where does that sit? If you're a brick and mortar business, if you're in a certain neighborhood, if you have a certain type of clientele, there might be a likelihood for one issue or another. If you live in an area like I do, where they can shut off your power at a moment's notice because of a wildfire threat, that's something we have to take into consideration. So we're really looking at the whole place of where you live, not just geography, but also all the other impacts that come in, including human-made threats like active shooter or any type of active threat. And what does that mean? Where does that sit? Are you prepared for those types of things? Do you have training for your people, not just your employees, but also how would you deal with clients and customers who are inside your organization if something like that were to happen? What would you do with them? Do you have the appropriate information to help keep them safe as well as to keep your staff safe? And does your staff feel comfortable doing that? So there's a lot of little things that fit into that. It's a lot more complex than having appropriate level of insurance and practicing a fire drill. And so there's more that goes into it there, and that's why you work with experts who understand that and have the capacity to look at things another layer down.
Right. And would you look at something like a pandemic, where for some folks they might have half their workforce down? It could be a distributed team, but you could have half your workforce down or something along those lines. Does that come under the umbrella of kind of emergency preparedness or disaster preparedness, or is that outside of that realm?
No, that absolutely comes in this realm, whether you're considering it because of a pandemic or you're considering it because those people are evacuated or in a zone that means they can't come to work, right? Either way, they're not able to work. The cause itself is not irrelevant, but it doesn't matter as much as the effect, which is they are not working. And so how do you deal with that? I was participating in an exercise earlier this morning, and the conversation centered around leave. And if an organization had employees whose homes were damaged in an earthquake, would they cover leave to help those individuals navigate their insurance and navigate, getting the appropriate funds available, right? That navigating insurance is a complicated process and it's time consuming. And so if you go back to your organization and say, hey, I need, 3 months worth of leave, and they say to you, you only have 2 weeks of vacation, then
So it looks like you're frozen there, Alicia. We may have lost you.
And that, is there any give and take there?
Are you back?
I am back
there for a moment.
Sorry,
frozen. That's all right.
I was like, oh, Heather is frozen. Nope, it's probably me.
All right.
Welcome to rural internet.
I know. We're prepared for this emergency because our lovely audience is used to being on Zoom and having tech glitches.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you talk about a lot that I really like, especially again, following you on LinkedIn, is that you're more concerned less about trying to prepare for a specific disaster, but preparing for the outcomes. And so you kind of just brought that up when I talked about pandemic, but you said there's a bunch of reasons that half your workforce might not be available. Can you say a little bit more about that kind of paradigm when you're looking at disaster response or emergency preparedness?
Yeah, this is a personal belief after 20 years of working in emergency management that there's a lot of reasons why something might happen, but all those things that are happening, that's having 20 different plans for every single possible thing. You're never going to be able to plan for them all. And all 20 of those plans are probably all going to boil down to some very, very specific rules. So focus on what happens after the event, right? Whether it's a pandemic that causes people not to come to work, or it's an earthquake or an evacuation, they're not coming to work. So what do you do then? What happens there? Can you offer them some opportunity for peace of mind? Can you offer yourself some opportunity for peace of mind? Do you have other ways that they can continue to work for you, or that you can develop products, or can you help communicate with your clients about slow rolling things? What does that look like? So again, not really focusing on the earthquake caused this, or the pandemic caused this, or the wildfire caused this, but this occurred and now we do this. Because the reason I like to focus on that is that as a small business, that's what matters, is what do you do next? Not what happened 20 hours ago or 2 weeks ago, but this is happening right now. And what do I do to counteract that? Or what do I do to pivot off of that? Or how can I leverage this capacity so that I'm learning and growing more and more, right? You brought up restaurants earlier about how many of them have pivoted towards online or delivery, or in my community, a lot of parklets. Those are things that aren't necessarily going away. They're now new lines of business. And so that again is like a classic pivot. How do I move from X to Y? Not what the pandemic caused, but how do I leverage that point to move into something new?
Well, I think that's why the word resilience is in the title here. And I think that when you look at being ready for, whatever may come, I think it opens up all those doors for being ready to pivot. And I would imagine at times you pivot before there's an emergency required, looking at your business and how it can function differently in different circumstances, and probably gets you ready for kind of moving in the emergency, but also potentially finding those, like you mentioned, those avenues before the emergency actually comes. And so I think there's this like fabulous kind of silver lining, right, of doing the work to prepare to put an emergency preparedness plan in place, but also looking at how that improves your resilience overall and where that there might be opportunities to kind of jump on moving forward. I feel like it becomes an important part of a business development plan, right? So what do we do to make sure the doors stay open? And as we're doing that, what does a resilient organization look like, and where do we grow, right? So there'd be an opportunity to grow, or an opportunity to stay and support your community and stay viable and support your community if the circumstances are more dire.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. Preparedness is resilience, and resilience is revenue, right? That whole idea of that equation, right? Like if you're prepared, then you're resilient. And if you're resilient, you have revenue. Just as a byproduct, right? Because you're able to make decisions more nimbly than another organization. It's not a competition necessarily. You might be going back to those other organizations that are part of your community and helping them so that they can also maintain their economic viability. But it gives you a chance to have some peace of mind that you might not get otherwise.
Yeah, I love it. So tell me a little bit about what it means to be a strong leader during a crisis. So the crisis is hit, you're in charge of your business. What does that leadership look like?
I think it looks really similar to what it looks like on an everyday basis, but it's even more important. So being able to listen to what is happening around you, not just in your organization, but get a tone, an idea of what's happening in your region, in your particular area, and then making some judgment calls on where you want your organization to go. You're a CEO, you're an operations manager, you have a very clear idea of where your organization should be moving, and what is it going to take to get there. And so those are decisions that you have to be able to make. I think one of the other things that's really important is that you hold the ball. So you have to make those decisions, and no one else is going to make those choices for you. You can get a lot of advice from coaches, from folks who are around you, from the Chamber of Commerce, or from your coaching group. But ultimately, you're the one who has to make that decision at the end. And that's such a key component of this process, is being able to develop something that you can rely on, that will give you a set of options so that you can move forward when you're ready, and when you have to do it.
Right. And I know that, when things don't go as planned, when you're in emergency, I feel like there's a stronger lean towards the leadership to do a lot of that decision making, because your staff are not dealing with their typical set of variables, right? It's like, here's the realm in which I'm comfortable doing decision making for my little portion of the business. And then once you hit an emergency, it's that nothing fits in that bucket anymore. And so I think there ends up being this extra kind of layer on that leader. And that's where I imagine like having a plan in place would be great, because then every single decision doesn't have to go through the leader if folks know kind of what our response is when this happens. And so it probably takes a little bit. I mean, I can't imagine. I would assume leaders in a situation like this get 0 hours of sleep a night, right? There's so much more to be done.
I mean, I worked with UC Berkeley during COVID, and I still run their emergency operations program there. And it's the leaders of that particular organization, while not a small business, get very little sleep. Right, they have to make some really tough choices, and they also have to be very apprised of other organizations that are making decisions that they now have to adhere to, and that's also a key part of the planning process and of the ability to be nimble in a disaster. Right, you might have a certain plan, but then there's always going to be an input into that plan that you did not prepare for. And so what does that look like? How do you move that forward? How do you communicate that to your clients, to your customers, to all of your stakeholders? And being able to understand that and have some sort of preparedness there is really, really important.
Right, right. So I know we're close to the end of our time, and I know you have a special offering for this summer. So I know there's a lot of maybe medium-sized businesses out there that don't have a specific role in their business for emergency preparedness, something along those lines, but are interested in creating a resilient business, and certainly one that can be an integral part of the community when an emergency happens. So tell us a little bit about how to get in contact with you and about your summer promo. And I will be putting links in the chat.
So I have a summer mini plan that I'm offering, which includes a rapid risk assessment, looking at your top 3 risks, a clear and concise emergency management plan that really gives you an opportunity to hit the ground running for whatever season is coming up, whether it's fires, tornadoes, hurricanes, or anything else. And then an opportunity to sit down with me for an hour and walk through that plan and coach you on what are the next steps in moving that forward. So not a full-fledged, but an opportunity to really dig in quickly and finish this up before the summer is over. And really, like you mentioned, right? You don't have an emergency manager on your staff. This is the perfect opportunity for you to set something forward so that you have a good track, and gives you a little bit of peace of mind in moving that process forward and making sure that you're ready for whatever is next.
Fabulous. And I have to say again, I love following Alicia on LinkedIn. I feel like I'm building my kind of base knowledge. I'm a solopreneur, so I'm kind of in a little bit of a different bucket, but you've already kind of changed my perspective and changed a couple of the things that I'm doing behind the scenes in my business to keep the lights on, and I am reliant on internet. I'm going to be looking at the banking piece as well, but your LinkedIn profile has been really helpful to keep me. It's the kind of thing you want to put your head in the sand about. You're like, it won't happen to me. It won't happen to me. It already has. COVID has already impacted us. I have had to leave my home because of smoke. Like it already has. And so having those plans in place is not only peace of mind, but it's part of our future, part of business as usual, sadly. So
yeah, it's now an essential part of our work. So this is a great way to get started, and you can always message me on LinkedIn or check out the link that Heather's posting.
Yes, love it. All right. Thank you again so much, Alicia. It's really been a pleasure having you.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Thanks, Heather.